My name is Julie Turney, and this is the HR Sound Off podcast show, the show created for HR and business professionals to discuss pertinent topics and trends as it relates to our professions. We're going to have amazing conversations with HR professionals from all over the world, get to learn their origin stories. How did they get into this profession? What do they love about being here? And how they want to set the record straight on that one misconception that really drives them crazy about our profession. Are you ready? I'm ready. Then let's sound off. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of the HR Sound Off podcast show. My name is Julie Turney, and I am your host. How are you doing today? I hope that wherever you are in the world, you are doing well. Remember, HR Sound Off is created by an HR professional for HR professionals. And excuse the goofiness in how I sound. My tooth is killing me, but I'm going to get through this. So today, my guest is Jennifer Armstrong-Owen. Did I get that right?
You did.
Yes.
Perfect.
And Jennifer is from Seek Out, and she's going to tell us a little bit about herself, and she's going to tell us about Seek Out, and we're going to talk all things HR and people. So let's get into the conversation. Welcome, Jennifer. How are you doing today?
I am doing great, much better than you because I don't have a toothache, but Julie, it is awesome to meet you, and I'm super excited to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. So tell us a little bit about Jennifer. Who is Jennifer Armstrong-Owen, and how did you get into HR?
Great question. And it's funny, so many folks have said they got into HR by accident. I did not. It was super conscious on my part. Nice. I was an engineering student in undergrad, loved math, but really found myself super bored. And maybe bored isn't the right word, but like just not engaged. Yeah. Doing the motions. And so I ended up switching out of engineering. And after undergrad, I became a Peace Corps volunteer because I wanted to go live in a country far different than my own. And as we just were chatting a little bit, I was in Dominica in the West Indies and worked with the youth there. And I was there, I really discovered the joy of watching other folks grow and develop and learn new things. And it became this incredible, realizing kind of how Dan Pink's about motivation, that was my that's my motivation. That's what makes me tick when, I help someone in the field with helping them with their, maybe it's business language around, writing a cover letter or whatever it was at the time. And so I came back, I got an MBA and did a compensation internship at a very large software tech company here in Seattle. And that was kind of how I got into HR. And I did compensation for about 7 years. I was a comp manager for a nonprofit HMO here in Seattle. And my Peace Corps, and ironically, my Peace Corps ex-roommate said to me one day, why are you spending so much time on spreadsheets and money? You should be working with people. And so in 99, I made a jump to the tech industry and have been doing that ever since. So I really don't know anything other than the HR profession.
Nice. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But as you said, you were intentional about getting into HR and what the motivation was for doing that, and being so giving of yourself to take time to be a part of the Peace Corps. Lending into your story. I think that's an amazing HR story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I appreciate it. Yeah. But you got into compensation. Do you think that was part of your love of numbers?
Yes. It's actually kind of interesting because, we tend to we tend to move from our places of comfort.
Yeah.
And doing brand new different things is scary. And so for me, when we had the head of compensation at the time for Microsoft come and do a brown bag during grad school, and what she was saying was super like, oh, it flared up, like it ignited my I didn't even realize that was a thing. This was back in the early 90s. And so that's why I really was very comfortable in that space. Like I was in HR, but I was doing linear regression models back then when you used to do that for generating pay lines. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is good because this is my core competency. But what ends up happening is, just like all of us, there are parts of us that we don't, even though we're good at, I used to say this to people all the time, just because you're good at something doesn't mean that's what's going to make you come alive. That's not what's going to make you thrive.
Yeah.
And, it was like when I called my dad in undergrad and I said, I'm not going to be an engineer. And, he was like, well, what are you going to do then? I'm pretty sure I'll figure it out. But, and I tell my own children this, figuring out what you don't want to do sometimes is just as important as figuring out what you want to do, right?
It's
and
true.
Listening to that internal dialogue and voice that tells you when something is connecting with you, like your internal, your intrinsic, matches your extrinsic. And that's where we should all, to get to, right? Because then it's effortless. It's just like, flow and thriving and all of those buzzwords that, are the folks that are smarter than me have come up with.
It kind of reminds me of the Ikigai model.
Oh, I don't know that.
So the Ikigai model basically speaks of, it's very similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it's like, if you can do what you love and make money from it, that helps others, then that's, within the center of all of that is your Ikigai. That's exactly what sounds like what you're talking about to me. Like immediately it made me think Ikigai.
And I might need to adopt that because I use Maslow's all the time, but it leaves me feeling a little flat. Like it's like a triangle, and you have to remember, like, it's all important and it all works together. It's not like and so no dispersion on Maslow, but I think I like the idea of the circle, like, because life is a circle. Right?
Exactly. So right in the center of that, if all those things come together, then you've got it made. And I also remember watching a video sometime back with someone talking about, the difference between building your career and your vocation. And, your vocation actually being what you actually love. And if you actually could get to that space, and again, it made me think, okay, that's Ikigai. Like that's how you get to doing what you love, that has purpose, helps others, and helps you and allows you to make money at the same time.
And I think I love that. And I think the other thing about vocation, because I'm at the other end of my career journey, I think vocation is something that stays with you beyond your career, right? I was volunteering last night for a nonprofit here that I support. And I literally was just thinking, this is, people always ask me, well, what are you going to do next? It's like, I'm going to finish the same way I started. And that's my vocation, right? And to your point, like when you can get paid for it, it is amazing.
Absolutely.
It's also something that's about your life force and the way you're wired, so that's got to continue beyond when when you're no longer needing to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wishing you all the best, no matter where you go. But right now, you are currently the VP of People at Seek Out. So tell us a little bit about your role at Seek Out. Tell us what Seek Out is.
Okay. This is so fascinating because I have been with Seek Out now since May of 2021. And I was looking, my previous software company had gotten bought by a large public company. And so the executives, we were all, what happens when you get bought, you move on. And so
Yes.
I took 4 months off. I did a certificate program at Cornell University on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Right.
And even though that space is something I'm passionate about, and it's been part of my role for a very long time, I had the time to focus on some real getting rigor around it and foundational. And it's funny, I didn't know at the time why I was doing that. And then someone said, can I introduce you to Anup Gupta, the CEO of Seek Out? And candidly, I didn't know what Seek Out was. And 5 conversations later, the fastest decision I've probably ever made, I joined this company. I think I was employee number 54. Seek Out is an HR tech company. We sell, HR technology, and our flagship product is our talent acquisition sourcing tool, which allows recruiters to do sourcing for diverse candidates, or defined candidates, candidates that don't show up in, the traditional data sources. And we equip companies to really grow their their diversity in their companies, which is something that's so critical. Like, it's always been critical, but the good news is that we're now, like, there's lots of wood behind that arrow, and companies are feeling that need more than ever in response to a lot of the racial injustices and marginalization that's occurred. And so for me personally, the mission aligned really, really well with how I'm wired and what's important to me. We are also a company that is creating a new product called Grow, which is going to sit inside companies and help them manage their diverse talent by providing internal mobility opportunities, hooking all your data sources together so that HR leaders, managers, and employees can have just incredibly expansive views of themselves, because we use outside data. We pull in all the outside data, even on your current employees, so they don't have to do anything. Their managers will see, the profile that they would have seen, as a potential candidate. And it's all around how do we help great companies and great people grow together. And so, like, going back, it was funny. I was thinking about the questions here, and I was thinking about how, my first experience of the joy of watching someone grow and change, and how now the bookends, I'm back to that. And so as the head of people, I spearhead all things related to our own people. Hiring, we are now about 200 and almost 40 employees. So we've hired
quite a bit.
190 people during the Great Resignation and the Great Reshuffle. And building as a young company, we're only 5 years old, but building all those important employee programs and policies and principles and philosophies that are going to be important for us to have as we move forward. So it's been a great partnership. I feel like I have come home again in a way to. So being able to access a lot of early parts of what got me going, because I think it's hard. HR is the people function is a hard function. We've lived through. My heart goes out to everyone who works in whatever capacity in HR. It's been a incredibly hard 3 years. And even before that, it wasn't easy, but exponentially harder. And so finding those joys along the way, and the things that you can feel super proud of and motivated by, are so critical to keeping your own engine of passion going.
It's very easy to lose your HR mojo. It really is. If you're, stuck in a really difficult place, and the things that we go through. And that's why I try really hard to raise awareness about what's happening in the background of HR, because I think the more that people appreciate the things that we go through, the more their perception will change about HR.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. But I've got to ask you, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So I've been getting a lot of questions from HR people who are in the startup space for the first time. And it seems to be, it's a struggle. Like I've worked in a startup. It's really hard when your CEO still has a startup mentality when you're no longer a startup. You know exactly what I'm talking about because you're laughing.
I do.
What advice would you give to HR professionals who are working in startups and they're struggling with helping the organization move out of that startup mentality when they're no longer a startup?
Yeah. And that's really, it's funny. I'm laughing because I stayed at my first startup for almost 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we were the same thing. We were a startup, like, 10 years after we had first, started the company.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for me, and I also think a lot of this comes down to experience and wisdom that you gain over time. And so, and I have to challenge myself to this. By the way, I'm originally from New Jersey. I am a very impatient human. It is part of my own the things that I get to work on until the day I die. And so for me, working in an environment where, hey, we're no longer a startup. We have 240 people depending on us for, strong leadership and direction and vision and all those things. One, I think being patient and focusing where you can make a difference, because there are things we as people leaders and people practitioners can do that don't require wholesale changes to the business model, right? And so what and easy for me to say that now because I've had to live through that, and I've watched other people before me do that same thing. And so learning how to figure out what are the things that I can do today that will actually help to serve the greater good, but don't require a wholesale change. Number one, and that will give you a sense of, there's an expression that I have used now for probably 20 years, but progress, not perfection. Like focus on progress, not perfection. If you set yourself up, you're always going to be disappointed. And disappointment's really hard to manage, by the way. It's like the one thing we don't teach. I feel like they should teach this in school, like how to manage disappointment, because it's a real thing.
It is.
So getting that progress and then being patient, getting some progress and being patient, because at the right time, that old expression, at the right time, the teacher appears, or the moment of learning appears. It does. So I've definitely spent time where I've been like frustrated, and not necessarily here, but in other positions, because this is the fifth company I've led people at. And, I always found if I just was a little more patient, I was almost, we would have been right there. Right. So I think that's an important thing. But again, focus on what you can do. Because even if you can't enact a company-wide change, you can still impact people. One at a time, and teach more, systematic thinking, and, create clarity where you can. I just heard a great three things. A CEO was talking to a startup community yesterday, and he said the three most important things we do in startups is create clarity, generate energy, and deliver results. And I like those three because those are three things that each one of us can impact in our own way, right? Even generating energy is so important for a startup because it's hard. This is it's a marathon and a sprint.
Everything's
that would be my advice. I
love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really do think that it's important for HR professionals, especially going into startups, not to have such high expectations of an enterprise business. You
Yes.
know, remember, it's a startup. There are a lot of things you're going to have to teach your CEO and coach your CEO on.
Mhm.
And it's important to build trust very early
Yes.
when you're working in a startup space.
And that's a really good point too, because I think it's about hooking your vision to the same long-term trajectory.
Yeah.
Leadership wants to know you're in it for the long haul,
Yeah.
right? Like, there is, like I said, like it takes time to build a startup.
Yeah.
And I think that once you have commitment around the table around the long term,
Mm-hmm.
then there's more freedom in the short term too.
Exactly.
So to your point, that whole trust thing was a great thing
Yeah.
for you to bring in, Julie, because that's you, when you have the trust, then you have more latitude.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Definitely. I believe that. Most people underestimate the power of process. They stick it in the back seat and forget about it until it's too late. But they shouldn't. Processes run the world. Literally, all of it. Stocked supermarkets, on-time trains, and safely landing planes are all made possible by systems of intricate, interlinked processes. They are the secret sauce of every great company, and HR teams are responsible for some of the most important processes of all. Onboarding employees, building teams, crafting culture. These vital systems are the lifeblood of every organization. That's why this episode of the HR Sound Off podcast show is brought to you by Process Street, the process platform of choice for HR teams around the world. Process Street is a no-code platform that lets you transform your most important HR processes into powerful workflows. Design beautiful employee onboarding experiences with extreme engagement that increase inclusion and reduce turnover. Sync tasks into Slack or Microsoft Teams, automate emails, handoffs, and so much more. Thousands of teams, large and small, trust Process Street to manage their most important people processes, like Salesforce, that use Process Street to onboard all the 3,000 Slack employees after the $27 billion acquisition. You can learn more and sign up for a free account at www.process.st. You're a very busy person, Jennifer. I know you're a family person, you're a business person, you're volunteering, you're living life. So what do you do to take care of yourself?
It's interesting when I think about that question, because I don't, like, I never think about, like, I'm old enough that self-care has been a thing over the last 10 years. And versus when I first got into this, profession. And, but I think we all have super complicated, busy lives. I mean, life is much more dynamic than it was. But I will say I started out, and my husband and I have 3 children. He has been a stay-at-home dad for a very long time, over 2 decades.
Wow.
And so for me as the working mom, and I think this is, a lot of HR practitioners are moms. And I think for me, I had this intense guilt around, if I'm not at work, I need to be in my home, right? I need to be picking up the load on the childcare and all of and spending time with my kids, right? Who I adored and missed all day. But I shortly after the birth of my second child, I realized I wasn't doing anything for myself, and I started running, because for me, I was like, okay, I can step out my front door. I can be gone for, a minimum of time. And I felt like that was a really like an okay investment me. And 26 years later, I still run. I'm not a marathoner. I'm not there. You will never see me in a race, but it is
run for you.
I run for me. And over the years, as you know, and we all go through different seasons, by the way. So now we're empty nesters, and I have much more time to focus on my self-care. And but I have a heart for folks who are trying to do everything and find some space where you can find, even if it's just one thing that feeds your soul, and get to the point where your family says to you, this used to happen all the time, no joke, Mom, don't you need a run? And it was like, that was our like internal joke. I think you need to go for a run because you're kind of grumpy. That's when I knew. That's when I knew. Okay, this works for me to help manage my internal, emotional landscape, which is complicated.
It definitely is, because you go through a lot on the job and at home and externally with friends and family. There's so many different factors, and if you're having a bad day, the first people to pick it up is those little people.
Totally.
They're the first people to pick it up.
I definitely have moments that I regret, like, moments where I probably should have made better choices, but regret is one of those things that I don't think serves a really great purpose in our lives. And so for me, I look for ways of, like, when I think about those moments of like, how do I either change it for myself in this moment, or, how do I help someone else along the way who, may have the opportunity to do it a little differently.
I think of it as lived experience, right? It's lived experience that's got me to who I am today. And it's the experiences that trigger me, that make me think, okay, how can I change my experience, this experience that someone's going to have with me going forward? You know what I mean? Not instead of dwelling on it. I think Bob Marley said it well. When he called anger a wasted emotion, like I really think anger is a wasted emotion, right? It doesn't make any sense dwelling on those kind of things, but think about how can you change that experience for the better the next time for yourself and the people interacting with you.
And that's how you redeem situations, right? Like, there's a lot of redemption to be had by being able to do things differently as you go forward.
Exactly. Tell us, what are you reading, watching, listening to right now that you think our audience would appreciate?
Well, I'm probably not going to say anything that anybody else probably wouldn't say these days. It's funny, but I was thinking about this question, honestly, because one, I'm a massive reader. And so I always have fiction books going, because I think fiction books give us like a completely different world to operate in and experience different outcomes and different, profiles of people. And I should look up this quote, but there's a great quote about what the benefit of fiction does for us in terms of our creative thinking. But beside that, I used to read, I just laughed when I saw this question, because I used to read all these books about, change management and leadership and all of the, culture, and, and not that those aren't great books, but the more experience that I gain and the longer I do this, I realize that for me personally, and I don't know who said this, I don't know if it was Brene Brown said it, but soft skills are the hard skills. I think reading about soft skills, reading about relational issues and acquiring that information is the thing that's going to serve me the best in both in my role here at Seek Out, but also in, my life, in my external life. So I listen, I'm a huge fan. I mentioned Dan Pink earlier. I think Dan Pink did he wrote a book called Drive, and now every book he writes is another wonderful, dynamic around the human experience. Brene Brown, Adam Grant. A new real favorite of mine is Susan David, who wrote Emotional Agility. And she's, I find her incredibly insightful, just in a very tangible, how do you manage a conflict, a conversation where you have a lot of conflict, and rather than figuring out the methodology to help deal with the conflict with the other person, she turns the lens internally and has you look at yourself, which I think, I think that's, at the end of the day, it's the only people we can control is ourselves. And that knowing ourselves and being able to, I just saw something called, doing about outer work and inner work, and doing that inner work is so critical. And it's such an investment in yourself. Like other people will benefit for it, but you will benefit the most. And then finally, I will say I'm bringing this up because we just had a good laugh about it in an executive meeting we're having, Ted Lasso, for the practical application of so many things related to leadership and conflict, and most importantly, to the testimony that people can change. And that's what we need to be focused on as leaders, is the potential of change and success that comes from that change.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's amazing. I got to ask you the big question. What's the biggest misconception about HR that really bothers you, that you want to set the record straight on right here, right now?
I have a couple. I really
I
do.
give you permission to jump on your soapbox.
Okay. I think one of the first ones, and this is related to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think that the conception, I started when I think HR was called personnel. So I've been through the whole, personnel, HR,
evolution.
The evolution, and it's been wonderful to see, right? But we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. And so, compliance, I think that people see that as the police, like HR police, and that really grinds my gears, because in some ways that compliance at the time when it was, first got adopted and was an important thing to do, was actually, if we apply today's terms in reverse to it, it's about creating psychological safety. It's about creating an environment where everybody can feel comfortable and be seen themselves. And so I hate I hate the reference to compliance, because granted, there are some things that are compliance related to, labor and industries, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the compliance that people just feel like they're going through the motions, and that it's just a checkbox. And for me, food, water, shelter, safety is number one. And so I'm going to do everything I can to get people to understand that's not compliance. That's part of being in community with people. And this is why we do this. And there's a benefit to it. The second thing would be HR is just there to protect the company. I think that one is, I don't hear that myself personally. I know it is out there. It is out there. It is out there, and it's a real thing. And I've definitely had employees say it to HR business partners, or say it to a manager because they don't want to come to HR. And that makes me sad, because that's not at all why. That's not at all the truth. For me, I feel like we are the glue that helps companies, and companies. Yes, there's an element of there's an element of we have to make sure that we're not doing harm to the company, to the business. But beyond that, it's about how do we create harmonious relationships, and how do we deal with problems, and how do we equip people to deal with problems, and how do we solve them, and how do we coach and mediate. And those are all wonderful things, there are situations that require coaching. There are situations that require mediation, right? Just like in our personal lives.
Yeah.
And so I see people, professionals, as folks who are intensely interested and focused on bringing people and teams and efforts together, because we have way more strength in our unity than we have in our disunity. So I think that's probably one of the ones that is so hard, because it's so binary, right? Yeah. Like you're either for me or you're against me.
Yeah.
And that's just not, that's not even the equation.
No, definitely not. I love that. Thank you for jumping on your soapbox for us today. We appreciate it. And no, I totally agree with all of those things. Like, I hate it when people call us the compliance police. I hate it when people say that we're just about the business and we're not about the employees, because nothing could be further from the truth. And, you know, there's so many of those misconceptions out there. And I just love to hear the perspective of other HR professionals. And no, number one, it's not in our heads. We're not thinking these things in silos, but we're all experiencing and hearing these things. And we all believe that they're misconceptions. And while there may be some measure of truth in terms of how some HR people deal with people in their organization, because out of misconceptions comes a measure of truth, right? But at the same time, it's not every HR professional. And so, you know, don't paint us all with the same brush. So.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like, it's the whole what's going on in our society today is you take one belief and then you just go looking for it to confirm it, right? And so, you know, I think coming into every situation and, you know, believing the best in the situation. And I think that's hard. I think we're living in a time where there's a very short fuse and everybody is an expert. I'm certainly guilty of that, of other things, right? Like, you know, and realizing, you know, a little humility goes a long way, and it serves to really, open up pathways to learn. Because at the end of the day, are we learning more or not? Because human experience, I said this to one of my kids the other day, like, I want to be learning still when I'm 95 years old.
That's right. If I'm going to live that long, I need to be still learning.
Right.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Lastly, Jennifer, what advice would you give to your younger self? If you could go back in time to talk to your younger HR self now entering the profession for the first time, what advice would you give to yourself?
Somebody asked this on LinkedIn the other day, and I actually answered it because I said, what would you give your younger self? And my first response was, listen more than you talk. Listen more. I think that's incredibly important. And I think part of listening is about being curious. And so I think I would have told my younger self to be more curious, which would then lead to listening more by definition, right? Like, it's, you know, you have to ask. Curiosity is expressed in the form of a question, which then you listen. Because I think to kind of actually to even what we were just talking about is curiosity opens the conversation and allows you to learn something completely different than what you went into the situation. And, you know, it's funny, time in the Peace Corps and living in a culture that's very different than your own. I learned some really painful lessons about assuming and not understanding why certain things were a certain way, and just assuming I knew based on the facts. And that was not, or what I thought I saw, right? Not facts, but just my own interpretation. And so that's been one of those things that just really try to remain curious, because it puts us all in a much better positional relationship with each other.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Be curious, keep listening, listen first, listen more. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for sharing. With that being said, you have survived your time today in the sound booth, Jennifer Armstrong-Owen. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your insights, and just sharing space with me and our listeners today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you too, Julie, for creating this space and lifting up and shining a light, right? I think that this space needs the light. It needs the encouragement. It needs the channel to be able to, recharge and help each other out and hear each other's experiences. I was grateful to have a great mentor. I think that's another thing I would give people advice. If I could just try back a second, is find someone you can learn from that you respect and trust. And most importantly, as he reminded me before I took this role, that remember to laugh, Jenny. You love to laugh, and having someone who knows you really well to be able to speak truth into your life at a time when you need it.
Yeah.
Yes. So you share truth on this platform, and I appreciate that. I think that we need more. So keep it up.
I will do my best. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me for this episode of HR Sound Off. I hope that you found it useful. You can find this and all other episodes of HR Sound Off on all major podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple, Amazon, you name it, we're there. Remember, HR Sound Off is created by HR professionals for HR professionals. If you would like to share your story, then reach out to us and let us know. Make sure to hit the notification bell and subscribe to HR Sound Off on YouTube as well as Podbean. And we'll see you again when we next sound off.